This project began about a year ago when a red oak tree fell in our yard and totaled our poor little Kia. When the tree service came to remove the tree, I asked them to leave the largest parts of the tree's trunk so that I could build something from it a little later and exact my revenge on the tree. Fast forward a year and the trunk has been relaxing in my yard since that day back in April, and I thought it was finally time to make something out of it. Surprisingly, even though I hadn't treated the ends of the logs with any kind of sealer, there was very little checking or cracking in the logs, so I grabbed my chainsaw and cut a chunk off of the end of the bigger of the two logs. After cutting into the log, I saw some spalting in the bark section that occurred between the time the tree died and now, and this spalting was actually a really pleasant surprise since it looked really cool on the finished bowl. Once I had a section of the log cut off, I turned it on end and ripped the log right down the center. And also, I've got to say, I was fairly impressed with this little electric chainsaw. It really held its own against this big piece of oak. Next, I brought one half of the log into the shop and started figuring out how big of a bowl I could get out of the log. I took my compass and traced the maximum size bowl I could get, about 13 inches in diameter, and transferred that measurement onto a piece of 1/4 inch plywood. I cut the circle out of the piece of plywood and then attached it to the center of the workpiece to serve as a cutting template. With the template attached, I roughly cut the piece into the circular shape over the bandsaw, using the template as my guide. Once the piece was roughly round, I could go ahead and get it mounted to the lathe. And there are a ton of options here, but I decided to first try using a wormwood screw. I first drilled a flat area for the wormwood screw to rest against, and then drilled a small pilot hole for the screw to thread into. Next, I installed the screw into my chuck, and then tried to thread the bowl blank onto the screw, but the wood was just too soft to provide any kind of holding power. So instead of a wormwood screw, I figured the spur center would be the next best option, so I gave that a try. And this worked for a little while, but the wood still proved too soft, and the spur center just wasn't making enough contact to create the torque needed to keep the bowl moving. After a couple of frustrating moments, I decided the faceplate would probably be the best option, since it's held on with a bunch of screws and has a ton of holding power. So first, I drilled a recess for the faceplate at the drill press using a 2-inch Forstner bit, making sure to set my depth stop so that all the holes were on the same plane. And after getting that area cleared out, I mounted my faceplate using about 6 1.25-inch long screws, and then mounted the faceplate to my lathe, and finally I was in business. I started the turning process by roughing out the outside of the bowl, first just to get the bowl completely round. And I didn't do a great job with the bandsaw, but I had a decent amount of work to do here. Also, I used my new Woodpecker's Ultra Shear carbide turning tools on this project, and first used the square tool just to get the outside of the bowl rough to shape. Also, I just had to throw in a few of these super slow-mo shots. They just look so awesome. And I've been watching a lot of William Walker's turning videos here lately, shout out Will, and I figured I'd try my hand at some of those shots. After roughing out the shape with the square tool, I moved to the round tool and really started refining the shape and smoothing out the surface. And one of the most rewarding parts of turning is finding that shape you like inside of the chunk of wood you're turning. It's just kind of amazing how your mind almost automatically starts doing this, and it really ends up turning into something cool. Wood turning is such an organic experience compared to a lot of other woodworking, and I'd really recommend trying it out if you haven't already. So once the outside shape was how I liked it, I flattened the bottom of the bowl and added a little concave so the bowl would rest nicely on a table or countertop. And with the bottom flat, I went ahead and cut in a mortise for the chuck jaws. I marked the size using a compass and then cut the mortise using a combination of the detail tool and square tool. And I really like using this detail tool to make sure the mortise walls are slightly angled inwards so that the chuck jaws fit nicely. And when I went to install the chuck, I realized I somehow sized my mortise wrong and had to redo it all over again and lost a bunch of depth on the bottom of my bowl, but that's how it goes. So before removing the faceplate from the lathe, I made a few shearing cuts on the outside of the bowl to get them really nice and clean. And that shearing cut is one of the main benefits of these Ultra Shear turning tools from Woodpeckers, who are also the sponsor of this week's video. By adding a 45-degree bearing plane, which allows you to tilt the carbide tip 45 degrees, you can get a shearing cut that leaves a super smooth surface finish. Also, the inserts Woodpeckers uses on their Ultra Shear tools are the strongest and longest lasting inserts on the market. The shanks on the Ultra Shear tools are hardened chromoly steel, the handles are made from rock maple, and Woodpeckers tools are all made right here in the USA. So if you'd like to learn more about why Ultra Shear tools are the best carbide turning tools on the market, check out the link in the video description below, and thanks to Woodpeckers for sponsoring this week's video. After doing a few more shearing passes, I removed the faceplate from the lathe and installed the chuck. I removed the faceplate from the bowl and then went over to the drill press and cleared out some of the excess waste from the center of the bowl with a Forstner bit. And you could certainly do this on the lathe, but I couldn't find my drill chuck, and it's just as easy to do it on the drill press. With some of the waste removed, I remounted the bowl on the chuck and started clearing out the inside of the bowl. And honestly, this was a really awkward process to say the least, mostly due to the weird shaped rim you get when making a live edge bowl. As you can see, the rim undulates up and down around the edge of the bowl, and this means you're turning air about half the time when trying to clean up those areas. It's really easy to dig in too far and catch on these empty areas, so definitely be careful here. Once everything was cleared out, I noticed that the bowl was still just incredibly wet, and I didn't want to let this bowl dry completely before finishing because I really like the way warped live edge bowls look, but I decided to remove the bowl from the chuck and put it into a paper bag with its shavings to allow it to dry slowly for about a week. And after letting the bowl hang out and dry a little bit, I pulled it back out of the shavings and remounted on the lathe, and the wood was much harder than the first turning session this time, but this actually made getting a clean surface finish a little bit easier. I did a few more shear cuts to get the surface nice and even, and then sanded the bowl to smooth out any of the problem areas. Finally, I removed the bowl from the lathe and then applied a few coats of Waterlox, one of my favorite finishes for this type of project. So I'm not going to be eating out of this bowl, mainly due to the fact that it's spalted, which is caused by fungus, and also because red oak is just so porous that it doesn't make for a great food serving project. Because of this, I didn't need to worry about a food safe finish and just needed to focus on a good looking finish, which Waterlox definitely is. After applying 3 coats, I brought the bowl into the house and figured the perfect use for it would be a valet tray kind of catch-all bowl where we can keep our car keys and wallets. And I think the fact that part of a tree that destroyed our car is now holding our car keys is more than a little ironic. Alright, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. I'm really happy with the way this bowl turned out. This is my first live edge bowl of any kind, and it was a really cool process. You really don't know how the bowl is going to end up looking because you don't control the shape as much as you do with a traditional bowl or any other kind of turning piece. It was a lot of fun, and I'm really interested to see how the shape of it changes over time and as the piece dries. I think that's one of the coolest parts of turning live edge bowls is you can watch the shape kind of warp over time, maybe get a couple of little cracks here and there. It just adds, I think, to that kind of rough, gnarly look that live edge bowls have a lot of times. So if you guys are interested in building something like this for yourself, I'll have links to all the tools and materials I use down in the video description below. And also, if you don't already, go ahead and get subscribed to the channel. I put out new project videos like this just about every week. Also, ring that little notification bell so you're alerted when I put out new videos and schedule new live streams. And last, I want to say a big shout out to the sponsors of this week's video, Woodpeckers and Waterlox. Definitely go check them out, help support them so they can keep supporting me. All right, thanks again for watching, everybody, and until next time, happy building.